Whenever I tell people about how my time in the Army was generally not very enjoyable and really rather kind of miserable, usually what they ask me is, well, if you didn't like it, then why did you do it in the first place? And my response is mostly that I don't just have one criteria that I use to determine whether I am or am not going to do something. It's not just I don't like it or I don't like the idea of it and therefore I'm just not going to do it. Instead, there are many other things that I consider. But I do notice that there are a lot of people out there that do have that outlook where it's just, if I don't like something, then I'm just not going to do it, or I shouldn't have to be subject to it. And they think they're doing themselves a favor, especially since this is a mentality that is kind of actively encouraged in our society, when in reality, they're just holding themselves back. And in many cases, negatively impacting people that they care about. And this applies to many things. It applies to going out there and being social, trying new things, fulfilling obligations, such as in relationships, or persisting through adversity, and the list just goes on. So in this video, I want to go through 3 reasons of the many reasons for why this outlook of just judging things based on whether you like them or not is not sufficient for you to really come to a comprehensive conclusion as to whether you should actually do it or not and whether it's going to actually benefit you. So first of all, sometimes we might determine that we aren't going to like something based off of preconceived notions about it. It's just kind of human nature to be a little pessimistic and jump to those worst case scenarios in our heads before we even try something and give it a chance. But I can say from experience that sometimes those preconceived notions turn out to be wrong. And you would only know that if you tried that out and gave it a chance instead of just dismissing it outright. And even better yet, sometimes you are right about a few of those preconceived notions, but they get outweighed by your enjoyment of those other aspects, those positive aspects of the experience that you didn't anticipate were going to be there in the first place. So for example, when I got to college, like I've talked about in many of my previous videos, I was a pretty antisocial person. I mean, I did get out there and try things every now and then, but I also spent a lot of time sitting in my dorm and thinking to myself that going out there and being social was just going to kind of suck. I mean, I had some bad experiences before too. I had a douchebag as a roommate in my freshman year, and the crowd that he brought back to the room kind of convinced me that hanging out with people, especially a large group of people, was just going to kind of suck, and that everybody was just going to be a douchebag. I wasn't going to get to do what I wanted to do, and I had to pretend to have fun when I really wasn't, and all this stuff. But fortunately for me, I had an experience in my sophomore year in one of my classes where we went out for a field trip, and we just went over to watch a play together, and it was a small class, probably 8 to 10 people. And it was a nice time. I mean, these were people that I actually got along with and that I liked. They weren't like my freshman year roommate or his friends. And so the first thing I learned was that, hey, look, there are different people out there, right? They're not all the same. And so I enjoyed this play, and I found that I enjoyed hanging out at certain times of the day versus hanging out late at night, because I'm not really a night owl. I'm more of a morning person. And then we went out to lunch afterwards, and we had a great conversation about it. And so from that, I learned that, there's not just 2 or 3 things that people always want to talk about. There are other things you can talk about if you find the right crowd of people that you get along with, right? And the list just goes on. So really the point is, if you judge that something is going to be something you don't like just because of, just on the basis of some preconceived notions, then you're never going to know whether you're actually right or wrong unless you give that experience a try. Now, on the other hand, and this is reason number 2, sometimes you are not going to enjoy certain experiences, but again, that's not enough of a reason for you to dismiss them, because as they say, anything worth getting in life is hard to get. And this goes back to the example I brought up in the beginning about my time in the Army. I knew going into it that I wasn't going to like it, and that's the reason why I did it. Because I knew that if I endured something that was challenging both mentally and physically on all these levels, that I would learn to become a tougher person, a more respectful and humble person, and that I would prove both to myself and everybody around me that I was tough enough to handle it and that I could make it through to the other end of this challenge. So in those many sleepless nights out in the cold, waking up, at 2 in the morning in the field, sleeping on my back on the ground, with my body sore and aching from all the manual labor that we did that day, knowing that I wasn't going to go home for another 2 weeks or something like that, I didn't just tell myself it's time to call it quits because I don't like this. Instead, I reminded myself that I don't like this, but this is exactly what I want, and this is exactly where I want to be. And so I need to persist through this so that when I do finally make it out to the other end of this field exercise and ultimately the end of my service obligation in the military, I will have accomplished my goal. And I was right, because 7 years later, I emerged from that, and I am the person that I am today. I'm much more confident, much more strong, much more disciplined, and all these things. But if I did succumb to that, and I told myself, I don't like this, therefore I'm just going to quit, and I'm not going to do it, then I would be nowhere near the person that I am today. And lastly, we've talked about how it impacts you. Let's talk about how it negatively impacts people around you in many cases. Like I mentioned in the beginning, case in point, your relationships. So if the only thing you care about is whether you like something or not, then you're not giving any consideration at all whatsoever to what the other person likes and dislikes. And that's just not going to bode well for that relationship, regardless of what type of relationship it is in the long term. And if you need proof of that, just put yourself in that person's position. How would you feel if the tables were turned? If the person that you had some kind of a relationship with didn't care about you at all, and they only cared about whether they liked something or not. So if you asked them to go out with you somewhere and do something that they might not like, and they say, no, I don't really like the idea of that, so I'm just not going to do it, right? Or if you ask them to do something nice for you, maybe bring something home for you, and they say, I don't really like the idea of doing that or going out of my way to get it, so I'm just not going to do it. Now, you're probably not going to enjoy that relationship very much. And I can say that I've had firsthand experience with this. I dated a girl in graduate school who had a very similar mentality, and the only thing that she cared about was whether she liked something or not. And ultimately, I mean, we're still friends to this day, but the romantic relationship didn't work out. So next time when you're in a relationship with somebody and you're considering whether you want to do something with them or for them, the first thing that you consider should not just be whether you like it or not. You should also take their needs into consideration and fulfill your obligations in that relationship so that you ensure that it actually works out in the long term. So to summarize, this limiting belief that's only going to hold you back is that if you don't like something, then you shouldn't have to do it. Because sometimes if you give something a try, you might actually discover that you do like it. Other times, you're not going to enjoy things, but that's necessary in order for you to actually achieve something. And finally, not everything is always about you. You do have obligations that you have to fulfill in your relationships to those people around you, regardless of whether you like it or not. So as always, I welcome your feedback. Let me know what you think of the video. Maybe even tell me about a time where you had that outlook and how that worked out for you. And I look forward to hearing from you. So that's all for now, and I'll see you in the next video.